Hello everyone! I'm back again with another tutorial. This one is going to be a quickie because it's just a helpful tip for people who need to unwind a skein of yarn. So today's tutorial is how to unwind a skein of yarn and wind it back into a ball in a way that is super easy to use, and we're going to make a center pull ball. So what you're going to need for this is just a couple of items. We're going to need either a paper towel roll or a toilet roll. I think this was actually a roll from some wrapping paper. It's close to Christmas and I tend to keep those things just in case, and it works really well for this. So a toilet paper roll, a paper towel roll, or some kind of round tubey thing. You're also going to need your scissors. You're also going to need a skein of yarn. I have a lot of them that are packaged this way, which is basically one very large loop. If you undo that first loopy bit, it's one big loop like this. Manufacturers and yarn dyers and yarn spinners, they twirl them up like this, and then it twists in on itself, and then they tuck one end in. And that's awesome to show the color and to show the texture of the yarn, but it's not a great way to work with it, so you have to do something first. So what I'm going to show you how to do is to turn it into one of these, a center pull cake. So the yarn pulls from that middle hole. The ball doesn't move, which is great, so it's not rolling around all the time. And also it's not really, really tight because the hole you pull, I'll show you. It's not really tight, which means if you're using wool, it's not going to stretch it, which is good. For this tutorial, I am going to be using Briggs and Little wool again. I'm using the Regal Wool, which is a 2-ply 100% wool made in Canada, and I'm using the color Sage today. Alright, so I'm just going to put these over here so you can see where we're starting and where we want to go. One other thing you're going to need is something that you can put that loop of yarn around. So this is going to be, what I usually use is Alex's hands like this. If you have someone who can just stand with their hands, I'll show you how it should look. Someone who could just stand with their hands with the yarn on it like that so that it doesn't get tangled while you're pulling it apart. If you don't have anyone to help you, or if you're filming a tutorial, the two best ways. My favorite way is to use the 4 legs of the bottom of a chair and to put the skein of yarn around those 4 legs. But it's hard to film that. So instead of that, what I'm gonna do, let me just move my boiling hot tea out of the way so I don't burn myself. So yummy. Okay, yes, what I'm gonna do to sort of fix that problem for the tutorial, you could use something that has a width or a square big enough to kind of keep your yarn from getting away. So first things first, let me just put this away for a second. You need to untie your yarn. So in these skeins, there's usually the yarn has been tied off at some location, and sometimes they also secure it a few times around. So you can see with this skein, I've got my knot right here, but I've also got some tie here and some tie here. I'm gonna just break into that knot. You could definitely just cut this, but I always try to untie it just because I worry that if I cut it, I'm gonna cut something wrong. Okay, and then you pull that one piece, and you have to go around the first round slowly because you need to undo the additional little weaves that they did to keep that skein together. I'm gonna go between skein and skein. I'm just gonna say it now. I'm not confident in either of them. I just say a ball of yarn, so I'm trying to get used to saying skein or skein, but I can't really decide which one I like saying more, so I'm just gonna go between them. Okay, so there we go. We've got our first round unraveled, and from this point on, it's just gonna be unraveling this this loop, and it seems easy enough, but with wool specifically, the fibers really like to touch and to grab onto each other, so it's much easier if you can keep tension on this, but if you can't, then just work slowly. It's worth it, because when you get a knot in one of these, you could spend hours trying to undo it. Okay, so the next step, you get your roll. If it's a toilet paper roll, that's okay, it doesn't matter. I'm just using this long one because it's easier. Then, with a little piece of tape, lucky for me, this had a piece of tape from where it secured the wrapping paper to the tube, but if you don't, just grab a little piece of tape or a sticker or tie a little bit of yarn around. You basically just want your end to be pointing up so that you have something to pull from for the center pull. And then what I do is with my left hand, I'm left-handed, so if you're right-handed, it may be the reverse, but I hold on to the tube and the yarn with one hand, and I do a few wraparounds, and this is just kind of the foundation. It's not the whole way we're gonna wrap it. So for, I don't know, maybe 20 wraparounds or 2 rounds worth of your yarn, just do a regular wrap around that tube, and that's just, like I said, our foundation. After we get that part done, we're gonna do something a little different. You're gonna turn your tube and work on a diagonal. So you're not going straight around, you're trying to put the yarn from the bottom to the top on a diagonal and turn the tube while you're doing it. So there's a few things going on. One, we're trying to keep knots from forming in the actual skein that we're working with, but also you're trying to turn your tube a little bit and then wrap a little bit. Turn your tube, wrap. And what this is gonna do, it's just gonna create a really nice secure ball of yarn, so it's not going to like fall apart or collapse on itself by keeping the yarn on an angle like this. The other thing to remember, this one, you can see how the yarn is trying to pull other strands in. This is where it's really important to keep an eye on that skein so you don't end up forcing any knots that you don't want to show up. Another thing to keep in mind is you want to keep your tension really like quite loose. You're not trying to like make a really tight ball, so it's really good to just work really gently and just wrap it as gently as you can. That's because, like I said, wool, when it's tight together, it tries to felt, it tries to stick together. That's what it's always trying to do, and everything that you do should be trying to avoid that. So by having the tube move between each round, you're reducing the number of parallel strings that are rubbing up against each other and touching. By keeping them always crisscrossed like this, by doing it on the diagonal, your ball of yarn is going to age better. So if you don't get to work on this right away, it's not going to be sticking to itself and causing you problems. That being said, I tend to roll my ball of yarn when it's actually time to make a project. Like, I wouldn't do this like well in advance. I don't know that it would cause a huge problem, but I haven't really tested it. I usually just wind my yarn when it's time for a project. And it's time for a project. These are actually going to be part of a sweater that I'm making. And I'm gonna do it on camera, I think, because it's gonna be really pretty. I'm just waiting for the rest of the yarn to come in. I had to make an order for it, but this is one of the colors that I'm using. So if you like this really pretty color, it's gonna be a men's pullover sweater, and I'm doing some dark gray, some green, and some grayish blue. So I think those colors are gonna look really cute together. And it's going to be a large, extra large men's wool pullover. So if that's something you're interested in, come back. Probably just over 2 weeks from now, it's going to be live because I have to still make it, but I need the yarn to come in first. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing now. I'm just wrapping, still on that diagonal. I'm still turning the tube every couple of wraps, and I'm keeping an eye on that skein so that none of these little strings end up coming out of their loop at the wrong time. Another way to make it a little easier to think about when you're wrapping it is you want to go from one of the top corners to one of the bottom corners if you think of the tube like a rectangle. So it doesn't matter which way you're wrapping, just make sure to keep it from corner to corner. Again, that's gonna keep your ball secure, gonna prevent it from collapsing, and also going to look really pretty. But that is pretty much the whole technique. So for the rest of this video, I'm just gonna give you a nice little time lapse of me rolling this ball of yarn, and then I will show you at the end, oops, show you at the end what we are gonna be left with. Also, I know that there is a tool that will do this, the Yarn Swift, I think it's called, but until I really feel like this way isn't working, or until I have, you know, a whole bunch of expendable income, I'm not really worried about doing this. It only takes me a couple minutes to do a skein, maybe more if I'm not paying attention and then I get a knot in it, but for the most part it's just a couple minutes out of my time, and it's not a huge deal, so I don't really mind it. But I would love to hear in the comments what you guys do to unwind your skeins of yarn. When you buy a ball of yarn, do you just work with it the way that it is? Do you not buy them in this format? Do you only buy them if they're already wrapped into a ball? What's your favorite way to work for a ball of yarn? Because I know I used to do it in the old roll a ball of yarn kind of way where you just keep twisting it, but there's no center pull with that method. And I find the center pull makes it really much easier to work with, because the ball isn't rolling all over the room. And if you like to crochet or knit on the go, then having a center pull ball means that you don't have to be worried about your yarn all the time. Like if you're crocheting on the train or on a plane or whatever, the ball of yarn is not part of the equation so much. Whereas if you're using a regular ball of yarn, then I find I need to like have it out of my project bag. Whereas if it's a center pull yarn, the yarn doesn't even need to come out of the project bag. It can just sit in there the whole time because it doesn't need to move in order to have yarn draw out from it. Also, again, if you've got somebody who can hold the yarn for you for 5 minutes while you do this, it definitely saves a lot of knots and a lot of organizing you don't have to do with that skein of yarn. As you can see from my video, multiple times I've had to sort of correct that loop so that it doesn't get tangled up. That's what the Yarn Swift does. It's basically like, think of like an umbrella, how it opens up. But you can put your skein of yarn on and it'll just sort of keep that tension so that you don't have to worry about knots. But if you're on your own and you're not filming a tutorial, I do honestly think that the easiest way is to just flip a chair, like a kitchen chair, upside down. And like an average skein is gonna fit over your kitchen chair's 4 legs and stay not tight, but at least secure. So that would be what I would say for the easiest method. But if you're just patient, then any method is easy. It's just if you try to go too quickly that, that you start to have problems with tangles. It's only when I rush that the yarn reacts. But maybe that's a good thing, because patience is a virtue. Patience is a virtue, possess it if you can, seldom in a woman, but never in a man. That's what my grandma used to say when I was little. Obviously, I was not a patient little kid, because that was said to me so many times. It was like a saying that we always heard. Or maybe it's just a thing you have to tell all kids. Who knows? Again, I don't know how much I can emphasize the keeping your skein tension taut while you're unraveling the skein. Get a friend to hold it or put it on a kitchen chair. For this tutorial, I didn't have a good setup area to show you on my chair. So I'm just having it lay out like this because I'm showing you the center ball pull is the main purpose. But yeah, you can see throughout this video when my yarn starts to get tangled, that just doesn't happen if you have it on someone's arms or if you have it on a chair. Usually I just use Alex, but I didn't have him to hold this for a tutorial, so I'm just doing it this way. And again, important again to keep your yarn loose. It's really easy to get caught up in the winding when you get a good speed going, and it's like you want to pull it tight because in your head it feels secure that way. But you don't want to pull wool because wool stretches and then it'll end up being thinner, and if you don't roll them all the same tension, then you're gonna have different lengths coming out of the same skein, and you're gonna have different thicknesses because you will have stretched it out and made it thinner if you pull too tight. So I like to make sure I'm being really loose on the ball. You can see I'm barely even holding the wool in my hand, like I'm just guiding it around the tube. I'm not like, well, I'm trying not to increase the tension at all. Also, if you find that you're coming really close to the edge of your tube, you can just scooch it up a little like that so that you've got more room to work with. That's one benefit of using a much larger tube, is that if your skein of yarn ends up being bigger than you originally planned, there's lots of room. Like this one is obviously too big to have been rolled on a toilet paper roll now, because a toilet paper roll is only about that big, so it would have disappeared into the ball of yarn. Do you think Hiram Lodge is behind the whole thing?
Oh God.
Do you think he was the bad guy in the first one? Because he had the
so.
He gave everyone drugs, remember, when they were teenagers?
Good. I don't know. Good question.
He's just been the bad guy for everything for a long time.
I'm just waiting for the connection to the Sabrina teenage one.
Me too. Me too.
So that could be it.
That could be it. That it's
more.
Yeah.
And we'll be like,
like it's Sabrina's aunt.
Kind of hoping for that.
Or her dad, maybe, because her dad was the demon. Whatever. Maybe he got fired by the devil.
Could be.
Because he was the gargoyle king. He was trying to be the devil.
Could be.
Okay, I'm almost done this ball of yarn. Feeling pretty happy about that. And I'm just, of course, right when I decide to start talking again, I get a knot. Or not a knot, but a tangle. Okay, there we go. So I'm still working in the exact same way, and that tail that we originally taped, I mean, it came out because the tape died, but the tail is still out there. And I'm still wrapping it the same way on the diagonal, corner to corner, around, around, around. And again, what that's going to do is just keep the ball super secure, keep all of those pieces from not touching anything parallel to them, which will help with the yarn sticking together. This isn't so much a problem if you're working with like cotton or acrylic, but with wool, anytime you have parallel lines, it's like the wool tries to stick to itself. So it's good because once you've crocheted or knitted something, your knitted thing is like extra warm because the fibers tangle together and don't let any cold air in. But when you're trying to wrap a ball, or unwrap a ball for that matter, you don't want it to be tight and you don't want it to be all parallel lines. So anyway, I really hope you guys found this to be a useful tip. Tip Tuesday, Tutorial Tuesday, because I was noticing in my live streams there were some people asking how I do it, and I thought that it was a common practice, but then when I described it to my people on my live stream, they seemed to not have necessarily done it that way before. So I thought I would show my way of wrapping up a ball of yarn from a regular skein of yarn, the way that I find most of my yarn is coming nowadays. But this works for if you're wrapping it from, even if you want to rewrap a ball of yarn, you can do that with this method. Just instead of dealing with your skein the way I am, just roll from the ball to this center pull. Some people call these center pull cakes. I am wrapping it a lot taller. Really? Just got a nice tangle. I'm wrapping it a little bit taller, so mine's less cake-like, but you could definitely keep it more squat by just keeping your diagonal wraps less upright. So you can see mine are almost straight up and down. If you wanted it to be more of a cake, you could take it more like that way, more on the horizontal. I wonder if the microphone can hear those construction noises. We have a brand new condo going up everywhere in Toronto, and there's a new one that's coming up right out my window. So I'm hoping it's not going to obstruct my view of the lake, but it will. So we'll see how that goes. All right. When you get to the end, what I like to do is unwrap a couple of times, because I never really pay attention to when I get to the end, and then I wrap right on the horizontal, right on top over itself a few times, and that way I can just take my yarn and I could tuck it in, because that's going to be the last round when you're pulling from the center, so it's not going to matter that you've got a little bit of a tie there. So I don't tie a knot, I just loop it around, and the next step is to pull out that tube. Ugh. And when you pull out the tube, the ball will collapse in on itself a little bit, and that's nothing to worry about, but then that first string that you taped to the pole, to the tube, now is where the yarn actually draws out from, and you can see it pulls nice and easy with very little force required, and then you could just leave that ball of yarn on your table, and then as you work, the ball won't move. The yarn will pull out, but the ball will stay right there. This also makes it work perfectly for a yarn bowl. So if you use a yarn bowl, by having a center pull cake, you can just leave it in the bowl, and then even if it gets a little bit tight, the bowl will hold it in place. So yeah, I hope you guys liked that tutorial, how I turn a skein of yarn into a center pull cake in just a couple of minutes with a toilet roll, paper towel roll, wrapping paper roll, whatever you want to use. That's pretty much the only tool that you need. If you're feeling extra, you could have a friend hold the yarn or wrap it around the legs of your chair. But if you don't have that, you can see you could still do it very easily without any tools except for your roll. So I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. The channel has started to take off, so I'm feeling like there's probably a few new faces here that haven't been here for a little while, so I will let you know. I do put out a new video every Tuesday at 7 a.m., and I also live stream on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at 7 a.m. So grab yourself a tea and come join me. See you next week. Bye!